Excellent. Thank you, Judith. Thank you to both Judiths for the introduction. One thing that Judith Schofield did not say about me, and which has immediately come to my mind, is that for a number of years, 8 to be precise, I was the manager of the Victoria Police Historical Unit, which may seem a long way from being an archaeologist or an historian. It actually was. It was advertised as an archivist position, which is what I was seeking at the time. It was really because the police department could not tell the difference between archives and museum objects. It was really a museum job. But I liked the job. It was, in fact, the most interesting thing I've ever done in my life. But I'm put in mind of it right now because of these lights. It reminds me of the view room. Those of you who don't have a criminal record would not know what a view room is. But it is a smallish room, about this size, perhaps a bit not as deep, but it had a bank of lights like this, and all of the people who were being viewed were, it was like the lineup, the traditional lineup, and the lights were to stop the people who were standing here getting a suntan from seeing who was in the audience. It's quite effective, I have to say, but this is what the lights have put me in mind of. I some 2 or 3 years, 3 years ago it must have been, I was here to give the Dickinson lecture on a completely different topic, but I'd forgotten about the lights. Maybe I would have thought more if I had remembered them. Anyway, I shall begin. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, but because I am a person who, clearly having been asked to talk about this topic, I know more than most, so I can say with some certainty, and I'm speaking entirely about pre-contact Indigenous culture. Today you wouldn't say this. The government has decreed otherwise, but I'm acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri-willam clan, members of the Coolant Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. What I'm going to tell you about the Wurundjeri-willam and the Coolant will probably come as news to you. I'm not surprised because it is an extremely complex thing that I'm going to lay out. And you'll be pleased to know that there will be an opportunity at the end to question me closely about this, if you can remember that far. Because I'm going to talk about a lot of things relating to traditional culture, traditional Indigenous culture in the Melbourne area generally. And it is, as I said, complex. So I'll start with the most complex part of the whole story, and that is with Aboriginal social organisation. The most important level of social organisation in a traditional Indigenous culture is the clan. Clans are named bodies, that is to say, they are named generally for some feature of the landscape that is indicative of their estate. Estate is the term we would use for the area that is claimed by, or identified with, is probably a more correct term, identified with by members of a clan. And the Wurundjeri is one such clan. Murrumbalak, as I've got here, is another clan. They speak the same language, so they are part of the same language group. Language groups are the next level up. You could say language group is the term that we would use now, whereas as recently as maybe 20, 30 years ago, we would use the word tribe. But language group is a more appropriate term, where a number of clans with contiguous boundaries in their estates all speak the same language, then we regard them as being a member of that particular language group. In the case of Wurundjeri-willam, all the members of the Wurundjeri-willam speak Woiwurrung. All the members of three other clans on the western side of the Maribyrnong River also speak Woiwurrung, and so those effectively 5 clans make up the Woiwurrung language group. Now, there are other language groups that we know of where the languages are similar. Boonwurrung, for example, or Boonwurrung as we would say. Now, Boonwurrung, Tongarung, Nagara, Ilmarung, Watharurung, Djadjarung. These are all languages that are similar to Woiwurrung. Indeed, some linguists would say that they are in fact just one language with perhaps 6 different dialects. Certainly in the case of Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung, the difference in vocabulary or the similarity of vocabulary is as much as 80%. So they can understand each other largely, and collectively, where you have this situation, as we do here, each of these language groups, of course, because they comprise a number of different clans, take up a very large area, but collectively, because they are bound in a number of ways, which I will spell out in a moment, we would refer to them as a nation. Nation is not a word that Indigenous people would use, but they clearly would differentiate. The people who speak any of these languages would refer to themselves as being human beings, because the word in all of these languages that means human being is Coolant. If you do not speak a Coolant language, one of these 6 Coolant languages, then you are not a human being. This is an us and them sort of distinction. Members of the Coolant nation are connected, as I said, in a variety of ways, and they have practices which mark them out as having a different grasp on reality almost than other so-called nations. There are other nations, certainly, like the Gunai, what we now call the Gunai-Kurnai, the Mara out in Western Victoria, Gunai-Kurnai in Gippsland, and a number of others that are relatively near. But these people, as far as the Coolant are concerned, are aliens. They are not acceptable. There are some clans from some language groups with whom one can trade, although you certainly would not marry them, but you can trade with them. But there are others that are simply the only intercourse you would have with them would be at the end of a spear, and the Kurnai or Gunai is one of them in terms of the Coolant. Now, a clan could be as much as 150 or more people. For day-to-day purposes, this is too many because of the way people generally make a living, which I will also elaborate in a moment. So the usual practice is that the clan will break up into small groups for day-to-day purposes, for hunting, gathering, foraging purposes. They will break up into groups which generally consist of a man or a couple of men and their wives and children. And there will be somebody else in the group. If you were to encounter a group, for example, on the Yarra, on the south side of the Yarra, in this area, and the bulk of the people would be Wurundjeri-willam, because this is their estate. But there might be 1 or 2 people from a far distant clan indeed, and there is a particular reason or reasons why they would be there, which I will also elaborate in a moment. And if I forget to do that, then hopefully somebody will remind me at some stage. There is much to know, and thus I as you can see, I'm taking this all out of my head. So I've either got it in a very good retrieval system or I'm making it up. It's up to you to decide which it is. The Coolant World is thus, we can mark it out. Got to turn it on first. Okay. The Coolant World stretches from Wilson's Promontory all the way up to the Murray. Boonwurrung, don't worry about the spellings, these are changed regularly according to academic whims. Boonwurrung, Woiwurrung, Taungurung, Ngari-Wurrung, Djadjurrung and Wathaurong. So central Victoria, there's a huge block of central Victoria is the land of the Coolant. And I think that is demonstrated here. The line which is drawn there is to distinguish Eastern Coolant from Western Coolant. I have to confess that I never understood what exactly the distinction is, except that I can say with certainty that these languages, Boonwurrung, Woiwurrung, Taungurung and Ngari-Wurrung of the Eastern Coolant are closer together than any of them are to Djadjurrung or Wathaurong. But that doesn't seem to matter too much because they still intermingle or they're still connected in the ways that I'm going to speak of in a moment. So this literally is the world as far as the Coolant are concerned. They recognise, as I said, that there are people outside that, and in some cases there are things outside of it, living things that might look like human, but in most cases, for example, in the Gippsland, the Kurnai area, and up here along the Murray to some extent, these people, they look like us, but they're aliens. So you don't do business with them. You do. There are others further along from the Swan Hill area, for example, that regularly came down and did traded for goods, particularly stones from Mount William, from the Mount William quarries just north of Lansfield. Okay, the Coolant peoples, including of course the Wurundjeri-willam, who are the locals here, comprised a cultural bloc, and they're united in a number of ways. Firstly, they are connected by marriage, and there are certain well-defined rules and protocols which are observed strenuously. To not observe them, to try and contract a wrong marriage, is a very risky thing to do.